Unbelievable amounts of money, time, and brain power goes into a car. From the drawing board, to the clay model, to the concept, it takes a whole team to make a car that no one has ever seen before. In the case of the Porsche Cayenne, making an SUV was seen as a huge risk. Luckily though, it paid off. But how do they do it? Today we're going to talk about how cars go from a drawing to a living, driving machine on the showroom floor. We're going to see how car companies decide how to produce the cars they do, how they design them, and just how awesome this German sports SUV is, because I love the Cayenne. Thank you to our friends at Porsche for sponsoring this episode. You know, we approached Porsche with the idea for this episode, asked for the help, because I'm actually really intrigued about the design story of the Cayenne, and much to my surprise, they were like, sure, we'll help you. And while a brand new one is out of the question, yeah, a used one is actually a lot easier to afford than you might think. Whenever I'm looking at a used car, I use a thing called the ZCPO. That stands for Zach Certified Pre-Owned. Zach here is Donut's resident mechanic, and we always have him test drive cars before we buy them. But with the Porsche Certified Pre-Owned program, I can toss out my Zach because Porsche has done all the legwork for me. Sorry, buddy, hate to do this. You're a little more hairy now anyway. For Porsche to become a certified pre-owned, it has to go through a rigorous 111-point inspection process. They can tell if the car has been thrashed. It has to have been repaired with all genuine Porsche parts its whole life. And they can tell that because the car has to have a complete service history. No nonsense here. Porsche certifies cars with up to 124,000 miles that are up to 13 years old. It can go see a PG-13 movie. That's unheard of in the industry. It's actually, that is unheard of. That's not just marketing speak, that's legitimately unheard of. Porsche puts a lot of trust in their used cars, and they should, because 70% of Porsches are still on the road today. They're literally putting their money where their mouth is, because you know what else certified pre-owned Porsches come with? A dang warranty. What? The best way to find a CPO Porsche is to go to finder.porsche.com. It's full of amazing and accessible cars, and if you click the link in the description, Porsche's gonna know you came from Donut, and it will really help us out. So thank you, Porsche, for sponsoring us. Now let's get back to the episode. Let's talk Porsche. Porsche wasn't doing so hot in the early 90s. According to Road and Track, Porsche went from 50,000 units in 1986 to just 14,000 units worldwide in 1993, and just 3,000 of those cars were in the US. Just for comparison, Mazda sold 21,000 Miatas in America that same year. 7 times as many cars as Porsche. To save Porsche, leadership knew it was time for some change, in the form of 2 new models drastically different than anything Porsche had ever built. Luckily, the company had ample inspiration for which directions to take, in the form of 2 unlikely cars which already found their own success. The first car had nothing to do with SUVs, but encouraged Porsche to rethink their entire production workflow, saving them a bunch of money in the process. The Mazda MX-5 Miata. This little roadster debuted in 1989 for the 1990 model year and was pretty much an instant success, selling over 135,000 units in the first 5 years in the US. Porsche made tiny sports cars already, but this was different. Something was missing. Porsche knew their own cars were pricey. They're a premium brand after all. But they decided the best way to right the ship was to emulate their next car after the Miata, a light and affordable, by Porsche standards, roadster. What they came up with was the Boxster. The mid-engine budget Porsche might have been a sacrilegious departure in the eyes of purists, but the Boxster would help save the companies in more ways than one. In order to streamline production, Porsche hired former Toyota engineers to improve Stuttgart's workflow. According to the New York Times, what the ex-Toyota people saw astonished them. Quote, Porsche engineers would have to sift through parts bins and climb ladders to search shelves while building a single car. The ex-Toyota engineers got Porsche on board with a now legendary just-in-time production system, eliminating wasted time and materials, which helped Porsche improve their production times and eliminated errors significantly, saving Porsche lots of dough in the process. Boxster sales were strong too, selling nearly 7,000 units in the US its first year in '97, a huge turnaround for the brand. What Porsche realized with the Boxster is that they had been neglecting a whole market, and with their next innovation, they hope to capitalize on a whole different market, one that was way outside their wheelhouse. no pun intended. So what if you wanted to sell cars year-round when the weather got cold? What could you sell then? The Ford Explorer was the latest member of an exclusive club of cars that caused an industry-wide reset, forging a new segment in the market: SUVs. The Explorer was a body-on-frame people carrier that was just at home on the road as it was off. The Explorer wasn't the first car to do this, but it was the first to reach stratospheric levels of success. But the same things that made it so great off-road hurt it around town. The body-on-frame construction just wasn't that supple on suburban streets, and that left buyers wanting a more sedan-like driving experience with the practicality of the SUV. Instead of buying station wagons like people did in the 60s and 70s, buyers still wanted that high-up seating position for great visibility. Toyota answered the call with the next great industry reset car, the RAV4. The crossover was here. Now, this isn't a video about crossovers, but as you know, they're the most popular segment of vehicles in the last 20 years, besides the pickup. So it's important that we understand their appeal. People like sitting up high, and car makers are more than happy to build that for them. The RAV4's release was about the same time that Porsche debuted the Boxster, just 1 year earlier in '96. The Cayenne wouldn't debut for a few more years, but the brewing success of the SUV and crossover segments in the late '90s got the gears turning over at Porsche. They needed something to sell in the colder, wetter off-season, a car that was practical and could handle some sort of off-roading if it needed to, but also had to be sporty. I mean, it would have a Porsche badge after all. Porsche knew a crossover was the way to go. Not only would they design a car that met these requirements, but they would design a car unlike anything else ever built. But how? What's the process of getting an idea from a designer's brain onto paper and then into the real world? I'm going to tell you. It can take years to perfect a design, especially if you're Porsche. Double especially if you're building an SUV for the first time with expectations sky high and financial implications that could make or break the brand hanging over your head. No pressure. Luckily for Porsche, they had a killer template to start from. Their design language is extremely distinct. Lots of manufacturers build cars that look like their competitors, but there's no mistaking a Porsche, and I'm not just saying that because they sponsored this episode. So, who designs a car? That task is handled by automotive designers, some of the most elite product designers in all of industry. Anyone who works as a designer probably wanted to work in the automotive sector at some point, but only the best can work on cars. The designers first sketch out a car by hand, and in the Cayenne's case, the Porsche team had a lot of building blocks to work with. What are the most recognizable features of a Porsche? Obviously the side profile, a decades-long Porsche tradition, as well as the headlights, the muscular shoulders seen from the rear, and surprisingly, the narrow hood. These were the signature elements the designers had to use to make a Porsche SUV work. If the Cayenne didn't look and drive like a Porsche, the purists would say the Porsche sold out, and the layperson wouldn't have any reason to buy a Porsche SUV in the first place. Nailing the look was critical. The SUV design of the Cayenne was restrictive of how much of a fastback the Cayenne design team could get away with. But when compared to other SUVs of the time, the side profile looks way sportier. The Cayenne also used the controversial fried egg style headlights present on the Boxster and 911, and personally I think they work really well in an SUV context. After the initial sketches are made by designers, the best drawings are selected and vetted. After the very best design is chosen, it's time to redraw the car in CAD software to make sure the dimensions would actually look good. But CAD can only take you so far in that regard. The final step in the design process is bringing the idea into the real with the help of clay. Yes, they still use it. The use of plasticine modeling clay might seem old-fashioned, but the truth is the auto industry hasn't found anything better for visualizing their designs. Typically, a scale version of a prospective design is modeled and then shown around the company for approval. Then they build a full-size version. According to this BBC article, these clay cars aren't milled out of a giant block of clay like I assumed, but rather the clay is stacked on top of pre-molded foam that was roughly cut into the shape of the car. This foam skeleton gives the clay modelers hard boundaries to work with, like the wheel wells and engine bay. Then the clay is stacked on top and carved away by hand, and that's what makes the clay so good for the job. The designers and modelers can collaborate on the same physical model and make changes on the fly as they see them with their bare hands. Tools like VR and automated machines might have a place in the process, but will probably never replace the hand modeling tradition because it's just faster than tweaking dimensions in a programming software and waiting for a machine to make the alteration. After the shape is done, real-life components like the headlights can be added to the model before it's covered in a stretchy material called Dynoc, which replicates the look and feel of automotive paint. Once completed, the clay model is scanned yet again into CAD software for manufacturing. But that's only half the story. Design is split between the exterior and the interior, where you actually experience the car. Interior designers make sure the car is comfortable to drive, not just with seat padding, but with the overall ergonomics. I'm talking wheel and pedal placement, all the buttons and knobs, or more commonly today, touchscreens. You ever been in a car where nothing made sense and just wasn't nice to be in, like 90s Chryslers or old Nissan Versas? I'm looking at you guys. Cases like that prove that interior design is just as important as the outside. Interior designers also choose the materials used throughout, which dictate the feel and usually the price point of the vehicle. So after the exterior and interior design is finalized and scanned, it's time to engineer the car. I know what you're saying, Nolan, did you not just get done telling me how the car is designed? Yes, I did, but now the engineers have to figure out how to make it work and how to put it together. Automotive designers and automotive engineers have different jobs. Not only did the Porsche engineers have to figure out how to make their approved SUV design fit together, they also had to solve the biggest challenge of the entire process. Figure out how to make the Cayenne, a big honking SUV compared to a 911, drive like a Porsche. The Cayenne siblings, the 911 and the Boxster, were light, planted sports cars. Neither of those adjectives were used to describe SUVs. And while the Cayenne would debut around 5,000 pounds, a ton more than the 911, people still said it drove like a sports car. So how did Porsche do that? Obviously, suspension and tires played a large role, but the secret sauce was the chassis itself. At the beginning of the design process, the Cayenne team had to decide between the traditional ladder frame used in trucks and SUVs at the time and a more car-like unibody. Ladder frames are heavy, with the body sitting on top, and as a result, they don't lend themselves to great handling. Porsche decided to go with the unconventional for the class, unibody design. I found this cool PDF of Porsche Engineering Magazine from 2003, which laid out the chassis design, which was sort of a hybrid between the ladder frame and a unibody. The very bottom of the chassis was made of ladder-like structural members that ran the length of the Cayenne. Not only would these provide a lot of strength in the event of a crash, but also protect the underside of the SUV when going off-road. Pretty clever. Porsche also used a variety of sheet metals in the chassis structure, using the heaviest metals only exactly where they needed to be in order to cut down weight. Porsche used over 10 different types of metal in the body shell alone to achieve this, which was an industry first for the class. Without doors and lids, the body shell weighed just under 900 pounds. That's amazing. It's an SUV that two buff dudes could deadlift. All that tinkering the engineers did resulted in an extremely rigid chassis, which was not only safer, but also what you want in a sports car and an off-roader. The Cayenne was so tight that when off-roading, you could get a wheel up and still be able to open all the doors and the hatch without any issue. When it debuted in 2003, the Cayenne Turbo blew people away. Power came from a twin-turbo 4.5-liter V8 making 450 horsepower, but that power went to the wheels through Porsche's traction management system, which included locking center and rear differentials. What that means is proper off-roading chops, but also the ability to send 100% of the power to the rear axle when you're blasting through the canyons. The air suspension was adjustable as well, meaning it could squat down for pavement duty or lift itself up to 10 inches of ground clearance for rock crawling. It was amazing, and all the major car mags at the time thought so too. But glowing reviews in car magazines don't save a company. Sales do. So how'd that work out? In 2003, Porsche sold just over 12,000 Cayennes in the US, about 3,000 less than the 911 and Boxster combined. From then on, the Cayenne was an instant success for Porsche. What seemed like a long shot for the brand quickly became a template for future moneymakers like the subsequent Macan crossover SUV, which became Porsche's best-selling model in 2016. The Cayenne showed the industry what was possible, and along with other sporty SUVs like BMW's X5, it changed the automotive landscape. Now brands like Aston Martin and Ferrari are gonna build SUVs, something no one saw coming 20 years ago. Look, I get why people don't like SUVs and crossovers, but if it means that my favorite brands get to keep making cool cars because all the money that those SUVs bring in, I'm all for it. Also, the Cayenne is a certified banger dad car.
That's a certified dad banger.
When I have kids, I would like to have a Cayenne. Thanks for watching this episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. I thought the story of the Cayenne's design was really cool, and it was awesome that Porsche made themselves so accessible for this episode. It really speaks volumes about the pride that they have in the cars they produce. So check out finder.porsche.com and dream about owning a certified pre-owned Porsche. And if you're ever in Southern California, I highly, highly recommend checking out the Porsche Experience Center.
It's a driver development center in the middle of Los Angeles where you can drive some of the coolest cars Stuttgart has to offer with a highly qualified instructor.
It's where we were supposed to shoot this spot, but we couldn't. So Porsche's like, hey, how about we send you 6 cars and you can just drive them all you want. And I was like, yeah.
Make sure you bring a Taycan.
Oh my God! Holy